Rise up! Rise!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, as always, Jess Root from cardswire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. Both of us natives of here in Arizona, grew up watching the Cardinals, fans of the Cardinals, and now, for several years now, covering the Arizona Cardinals from the other side as media and fans. This is episode 252. We've been doing this since 2013. Thank you for listening, as always. And in this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, in this edition of this show, we've got a number of things, especially since the Cardinals finally won a game. They snapped their 6-game losing streak against the Cleveland Browns, defeating them 38-24 over the weekend. We'll unpack some of the things that happened there, talk about Kenyan Drake and his performance. But to kick off the show, we will start by talking about the Pro Bowl. As the Pro Bowl teams were announced, the Arizona Cardinals have a couple of representatives and 3 alternates. Did the league get it right? Should there have been different players selected from the Cardinals? Did the Cardinals who got in deserve to get in? We'll talk about that, as well as going into the game against the Browns. In particular, we will break down and unpack the performance from Kenyan Drake, Patrick Peterson, and go through some other takeaways. We'll talk about some news that's a few days old now, as Terrell Suggs was released by the Cardinals over the weekend. What does it mean? What happened, and how did it get to that point? And then we'll look ahead to the Seattle Seahawks this weekend, as we will preview that matchup as they take to the road for their final 2 games. So that is how we will start off this show. So let's get started with the Pro Bowl. Seth, we got 2 Pro Bowlers this year. You've got Chandler Jones, you've got Budda Baker. They are the 2, they're actually starters, Pro Bowl starters. And then on top of that, you have 3 alternates in Kyler Murray, Zane Gonzalez, and Dennis Gardeck. Anything surprising out of those 5? We'll just go with the guys that are actually selected. Anything surprising out of those for you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we expected Chandler. I mean, he's the 2nd leading sacker in the NFL. He's been great this season. I think if you just put the stats down in front of Budda Baker, you might have people that are surprised that there are questions. But if you watch the first half of his season, it really wasn't great. He struggled at times. He was playing free safety, and that's really not his strength. We've talked about this before. He really was kind of a clone of Tyrann Mathieu and working as a kind of a hybrid strong safety slot corner. So when you look at it from his final, 6 games, it's been incredibly strong. When you look at the first several games, you're going, this guy wasn't very good. He had a lot of stats, but that's because he's making tackles, 40 yards downfield. I mean, Jones is just perpetually underrated. Wouldn't you agree? I mean,
well, he is, but the truth is, while he doesn't make these big lists, he's now a Pro Bowler for the 2nd time in 3 years with the Cardinals, or 2nd time in 4 years with the Cardinals. I mean, he's getting respect. They haven't had the wins, and if you're looking at pass rushing impact, like in terms of disruption, I get why he doesn't I get in some ways why he doesn't make some of the other lists, especially at his position. But no, I'm not surprised by and I'm glad it would be a travesty if he's not on the Pro Bowl, especially when he's an outside linebacker this year. Just the way they do positions, it still makes it. It still matters. Defensive end becomes a little bit different story about making the Pro Bowl, but as an outside linebacker, he makes sense. Buddha's pass coverage numbers are actually, if you break them down, aren't good, but you can tell. And here's the thing about Buddha as well. He's already been there. He's been there as a special teamer, but so he's already got a cachet of respect out of, and surprisingly, all through the voting process, he was one of the top vote getters at his position, which helps. He has a cachet of respect within the league from coaches and players. They know the talent that's there. This is kind of validation for what the Cardinals saw in Budda Baker. He is a Pro Bowl safety. He had some struggles early on. He's playing quite well. He's been much more impactful. It's much more reminiscent of the impact he had when he was first inserted into the lineup as a rookie when Tyven Branch went down.
Yeah, and when you kind of watch this season, you've seen the growth of Budda, but also the usage of Budda in the correct sense and in ways that has allowed him to kind of blossom into the player that you just talked about, the guy that was playing that Tyven Branch role, that was playing off of Tyrann Mathieu, Patrick Peterson, a good DJ Swearinger at the time. So when you kind of look at that rookie season and how well he played at the end of the season on defense, not just on special teams, but on defense, you see why he's starting to get that, like you said, that cachet in the NFL of being a very good safety. One that's likely going to command a pretty penny in the next season or so.
Yeah. What was actually more impressive, because those were two guys I kind of expected and hoped would be there. And Chandler Jones, I felt, was almost a lock. Budda would be in the mix. But what actually was, I really enjoyed seeing the alternates. Zane Gonzalez probably should be a Pro Bowler, but this is his first year of doing anything in the league as a kicker. Completely understandable. But the fact that Kyler Murray and Dennis Gardeck are both alternates, that tells me something about the respect that Kyler already has in the league, that as a rookie on a team that's only won 4 games, considering he's had, like, in terms of statistical games, in terms of passing, he's had some really, really low ones, like the 80,000 completions for 100 yards and against Carolina, and he's had a couple of 104 yards or 100-something yards against the 49ers, but then he's had the high end, so you can tell that, game recognizes game, as they say, and the players and the coaches around the league see that in him. Gardeck is so interesting because a season ago as a rookie, he wasn't even the team's best special teams player. Zeke Turner was. Zeke, I think, was hurt this year with the injury that he had early on, but Gardeck has really carved out a name for himself. He does not have, like last year, Zeke Turner was insane. I think the Cardinals on the film, I think their coach's film review gave him credit. I think it was like 22 special teams tackles, and this year I don't think anyone has more than 8. But Gardeck's been all over the place. He's earned, as an undrafted kid, in just a couple of seasons, to be right there among the names of the best special teams players in the league is quite something, honestly.
Yeah, and one of the things with like the special teams situation is it always comes down to guys that are known. So like Matthew Slater from the Patriots is basically the special teamer every single season. in the AFC. And that's because, one, he's great. I mean, if they're going to put like a Pro Bowler in, or sorry, a Hall of Famer in based on just special teams, like he's like this generation's Steve Tasker, basically, from a, fantastic special teams play point of view. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's a strong compliment that he's already getting mentioned in that way. And really, I mean, that is one thing that we've seen consistently from the Cardinals, is that they tend to have strong special teams play, whether it was Ron Wolfley. The name's escaping me of the guy in the 2000s, but they had a guy that made the Pro Bowl a couple times. They typically have good special teams
Sean
defenders.
Morey,
Sean Morey,
Jeremy Urban,
and
Justin
Jeremy Urban.
Bethel.
And the reason why is because they usually have bad offenses that are punting all the time. So, they have a chance to play coverage and make plays a lot on specials. And that's typically who gets it, because the returners are different categories. So when they're return guys, it's a little different than true special teamers.
Now, next part. Did any of the Cardinals who didn't make it deserve to make it? Like, Zane Gonzalez, I get he deserves it. Jordan Hicks, I wrote about as he's, for me, he's their biggest snub. He deserves to be in the Pro Bowl. I get why he's not. I get it. When you only get two inside/middle linebackers, and you have Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly in the same conference, you're not going to make the Pro Bowl. That said, statistically, he's been superior across the board. So does he deserve the Pro Bowl? Yes. Does he deserve it over Kuechly and Wagner? If you're going by a 1-year deal, maybe. I don't know who you keep off that list. Probably. I think overall, if statistically, he's been better than Kuechly across the board this year. But he's also the quarterback of a bad defense and hasn't yet put together, if this is the first year he's put together an actual full season. And we know how Pro Bowl voting goes. The first year you deserve to go, very rarely do you actually go. That said, he deserves a Pro Bowl spot, but I get why he's not in there.
You're always going to have a hard time getting in at inside linebacker because, as you said, one, you've got Luke Kuechly and Bobby Wagner, perennial all pros, not just Pro Bowlers, but all pros on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I don't even know who the AFC inside linebackers are. Darius Leonard and Dante Hightower. So, I mean, like, when you look at just inside backers in the NFL, like, probably the four best made it, and the guys that are, two of which will probably be all pros this season. So that's the part that you look at and you just say, yeah, that's a position that you may never see, at least for the time being, an Arizona Cardinal get in there with, and it's just unfortunate because that's how it usually works out, right? Like, the best players usually make it with the biggest names, and then when you just have the two biggest names at inside linebacker, it sucks, and yeah, getting past it is going to be nearly impossible. Now,
question: do you think we've seen the last of Larry Fitzgerald in the Pro Bowl? He didn't make it this year. Aside from if he continues on, if he comes back next year, is he any more a Pro Bowl level player? I think the last time, what was he last year? An alternate? I don't remember, but obviously the stats don't back it up this year. But are we done? Are we done seeing Larry Fitzgerald in the Pro Bowl?
He'll probably, the thing is with Larry is that he doesn't want to go if he doesn't deserve it. And what I mean by that is he doesn't want to announce that he's going to retire. Like, this is going to be my final season, and then get a Pro Bowl nod because of it. And so that's the hard kind of part. Like, if it comes out, or like somebody finds out or learns that they're going to that he's going to retire, I could see him getting in. From a production standpoint, again, you just look at the NFC wide receivers. I mean, Julio Jones is a perennial All-Pro. Michael Thomas is potentially the best wide receiver in NFL right now. Could he take over a Mike Evans or Chris Godwin position? Maybe. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's just it's a hard sell, I would say, at this juncture of his career.
And he was an alternate last year.
And I could see him being an alternate again. I don't think he's going to make another straight Pro Bowl unless it gets
or
out.
Unless he pulls off a 100-catch season like he did.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
But yeah, I think last year, assuming, because he can still be the top guy, but at least with the passing game, they just didn't complete enough passes to anyone to really. I mean, they're nowhere near 1,000 yards from anybody.
I mean, you never know. He could put up 150 the next 2 games each. Right?
Yeah, he could. That would be something. But then that's probably true. We're probably done seeing Larry Fitzgerald as a Pro Bowler, but it's probably time. We'll see what happens over the next. And maybe we'll be talking about his decision to retire in this offseason, or his decision to come back, and what his impact will be. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, we're actually get into the game, but we're gonna talk specifically about Kenyan Drake and his career performance. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and Kenyan Drake had himself one heck of a game. 22 carries, 137 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and another catch for 9 yards as well. First player to rush for 4 touchdowns in a game for the Cardinals since Ronald Moore did it in 1993. What was the most impressive thing for you about his performance?
I think just the way he runs is really kind of what impresses me the most about Kenyan Drake. He is a very decisive and aggressive runner. He's not as balanced as, say, a Leonard Fournette or Ezekiel Elliott. He's not as shifty, obviously, as like an Alvin Kamara or a Christian McCaffrey. But what he is he's a guy that gets the yards that are there. He's got a nose for running lanes. He has the ability to find avenues and creases, and then he is explosive enough to make things happen on the second level. And he's a really good open field runner. I mean, you saw the move he put on Denzel Ward on the edge in a one-on-one situation that, kind of shook Ward and gave him a free run to the outside for a big gain. When you watch Drake run, he's not he's not a home run hitting kind of big play running back, but he is a slashing guy that understands his role, that understands where the lanes are supposed to be and finds them and hits them with authority. And I think that's what he did so well at Alabama, and I think that's what he continues to do well in the NFL when given an opportunity. And it's why, I mean, you look at Kenyan Drake's career average from a yards per carry standpoint, and he really has been a guy that consistently is putting up 4.5 plus yards per carry, and the benchmark of success is typically 4 yards per carry. I mean, as a rookie, he averaged 5.4. That was on limited rushes. Year two, he had 644 yards on only 133 carries. That was 4.8 yards per carry. He was at 4.5 last year. With the Cardinals, he's at 4.8 yards per game. With the Cardinals in his limited time, 6 games, 6 starts, he's averaging almost 70 yards a game. That would be a really good season. You'd be talking just over 1,100 yards. Obviously, now the touchdowns are a bit skewed. When you've got 5 and 6 games, he's probably not going to be a 13 touchdown type guy, but he could be a guy that gets you 8 to 10. And then you look at the receiving, he's a complete, and we talked about this last week, he's a complete 3-down back. He's a guy that does well in the passing game as both a blocker and a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. He now has 22 receptions for 174 yards. That's, almost 8 yards per reception. I just think he's a guy that is a well-rounded back. The biggest thing is he's never had a chance to be a bell cow, and now he's kind of getting that chance, and he's showing that, hey, I can do this. And by bell cow, I mean he's only had over 20 carries once. So he's a guy that when lanes are there, he can get them. He's not going to be a guy that creates or makes yardage that's not there, but when the yards are there to be gotten, he's a guy that's going to get them.
What I found interesting is actually a tweet that Bob McManaman found. It was based on Next Gen Stats. And what I found the most interesting is he was an opportunistic runner. I don't know what to think about it exactly, but on 20 of his 22 carries, he only saw a 6-man box. And that's where he picked up 130 and all 130 of his 137 yards and all 4 of his touchdowns. And so he produced big, he should, but it was almost partly because of offensive scheme, because of the way that Cliff had things lined up, which is interesting because there seemed to be a lot of 2 tight end mixes, which makes me wonder if while going jumbo, if Cliff didn't, I'd have to go back and look at this plays, if he didn't decide to kind of fake the defense out to make them try and cover a tight end out the field, because they did a lot. They did most of their work out of 2 tight ends, and if they were only fix a 6-man box, or maybe that was just Steve Wilkes' thing, because we know about that quite well.
It works when your backers, we know Wilkes, and he likes to run 2 backers a lot, and it works when your backers are Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis. Not so much when they're Hassan Reddick and Josh Bynes, or even
Joe Schobert.
Joe Schobert and whoever the other guy was, I can't even remember. So yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by getting the yards that are there. Like, there are different types of backs in the league, and you look at like Ezekiel Elliott. He's a guy that just gets yards. Like, Zeke to me has been consistently the best pure running back in the NFL. He's a guy that can consistently produce in the offense, and he's comfortable in those positions. When you look at a guy, I mean, Christian McCaffrey is the same way. When you look at kind of the year-to-year guys, whether it be David Johnson or, I don't think Alvin Kamara. Like, I'm not saying they're not great players, but there are guys that are natural runners that are able to get through minuscule holes or holes that aren't even there. And then there are guys that take the lanes that are there and do well with them. Drake, that's who Drake is as a runner. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we've seen a plethora of running backs here that can't do that. And so when you look at Drake and what he is as a runner, I think that he's been put into a system that he thrives in. He is a good zone runner, that's able to find and exploit zones, but he's also a guy that can get downhill quickly and aggressively, and that's something that he's done consistently at Alabama and now in Arizona. When the holes are there, he's going to hit them, and he's going to hit them hard.
The question now is, because we've seen him have two big games, the first one, then his production tailed off. Now he's had another big game. Is he a guy that can touch the ball 20 times a game and still be effective from game to game? He never did it in the pros. I mean, back in Miami, there were a couple of games in a row a couple of years ago when he had the workload late in the season. Alabama, he hadn't done it, so he hasn't been a workhorse guy since high school. That's the one concern I have is especially if we're looking at him as an option for 2020, and you decide to move on as well from David Johnson. Can he be that guy, or are we going to see him break down? You know, and you hate to point to this, but there was a question as to whether Chase Edmonds could handle a full workload. He did it the one game, and what happened in the next game? He got hurt at the end of the game, which led to, and I'm not saying that those things are the one cause the other, but that's always one of the questions that you have. If you have a guy who hasn't been a workload, a workhorse in the pros consistently, are they going to be able to hold up physically beyond that? Because that, coming out of the draft, that's one of the slights on him is that he was a little thin. Now, in terms of size and in terms of height and weight, he's fine. But in terms of frame, he is thinner than some running backs.
He is, and one of the things I think that you see with with Drake is that you have a guy that, you know, he's not going to be kind of that pound it, and then break one. He's a guy that's going to take big plays. Chase Edmonds is the same way. So when people tweet at you and I or question the potential re-signing of Drake, that is where their concern should lie, is that Drake, his skill set seems replaceable in the sense that you can put Chase Edmonds and get similar production back there. The difference being Drake is a little more built for a full NFL workload, so you have the opportunity, or you feel like he could be a 20 touch a game player, so 300 plus touches for a full season. I mean, that's the question though. Is that worth $9 million or $10 million in salary cap space over 2 years?
That's the question. That's the question. Coming on next to the Raise Up C-Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about Patrick Peterson and his play, because what we saw on Sunday was Patrick Peterson that we've been quite familiar with over the years. That's coming on next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Patrick Peterson had himself a game. For the first time all season, he looked like the shutdown guy that he's been throughout his career. I anticipated this in a way in the preview that I wrote for the Sports Weekly publication through USA Today, and that was the kind of the matchup to watch, was him and Odell Beckham, which, if there's one thing Patrick loves, is to match up against the big name, big time receivers in this league and to take them head on. And he told his coaches, I want Odell. Give me Odell. And what did he do? 13 targets for Odell, 66 yards. Very good. And even those yards were inflated because they came in garbage time when they were giving up the middle of the field to him.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see Patrick playing like Patrick. And I tweeted out during the game, I thought that was the best we have seen Patrick play in probably 2 seasons, probably since the 2017 season. He was engaged. He was a guy that was looking to play at a physical level that we really haven't seen from him over the last several weeks or even seasons maybe. And I think the reality is you have a guy that is still, and I hate to say this, but you and I kind of talked about it. It is a guy that is trying to find his way, despite playing without maybe the enhancement that he had been using previously. And so, it seems like he's trying to just find his footing again in that sense. And for that reason, I think that you're seeing a guy that is finally kind of finding himself and getting comfortable in his skin again. And we know how kind of emotional he is as a player. And so to see him doing that and playing in that way, I think is important because it'll allow him to feel like a guy that can move forward with the same type of level of consistency and production. I think he's a guy that kind of feeds off his own highs, and to see him playing at that level again, I think is important and shows us what he can kind of still be in this league.
For me, I want to look at it like this. The bad plays we've seen from him, or the ones that he seems to give up on, might be more than anything an expression of frustration that he's not able to do what he's used to doing. And that being because of all the time off, that 6 weeks, not only the time off, out of practice, and in a new defensive system. I want to think that this is going to be more than just a flash, that perhaps this was a turning point for him where he's physically finally right, and in a good place in terms of defensive scheme. Well, one, he was fired. I knew he'd be fired up, and so that matchup is one that he should be fired up for, and wish he had the same sort of energy in the other games, because there were times it didn't look like he cared. But whether or not it was because of whatever substance he was using, maybe it just took him longer than we anticipated. And in fairness, he caused some of that himself with the expectations. Everyone expected him to save the defense, even though Cliff said there ain't nobody coming through that door to fix this defense, but with one person. Maybe this really was it physically, and mentally he's finally in the right spot. And like what Cliff has been saying about physically, he just wasn't there yet. Maybe that was the case, because now he seems engaged. He said he's going to be back next year. He sounds like a guy he sounds like the pre-trade request Patrick Peterson. Now, let's be honest here. It felt like this is the first time he's really been used to man and just follow a guy around on the field. Cliff indicated it's the first time he did it well. because he's been asked to do it in previous games. I don't think to the extent, and that was probably because he wasn't having nearly the success. And after his interception in the end zone, it was a cool tweet that I saw from the team, because he was wired for sound as they caught him saying after the interception, he's fired up, swearing at everyone, fired up with the play that he made, and he goes to Vance Joseph and tells him, "I'm not going to let you down again," meaning kind of referring to the previous week's play. It felt like making that play got him right again. And this is the fired up, positive Patrick Peterson we're used to seeing. Hopefully that's what we see for the rest of the season, so we don't have to ask him questions about effort or ability or things like that.
Yeah, and that's all that you want, is you want to feel like the effort's there. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that sometimes you don't feel like it. So I think that as you get a little closer to kind of where he's comfortable and he's playing confidently, I think you'll see him continue. But I mean, that's what I said. Like, the unfortunate thing, and I hate saying this, but like, the unfortunate thing is he's kind of always been a diva, right? And so that it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that he is, when he's feeling himself, that he is playing at a higher level than when he is feeling like it's him against the world.
Coming up next to the Rise Up C-Red podcast, we'll come back and talk about some of the other positives from the game. What are other takeaways and things that we got out of that game? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. Back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Other takeaways from the game, things that stand out. You want to talk about Dan Arnold, Mason Cole playing 3 different positions, some of the injuries, Hassan Reddick. What are some of the things that stood out to you outside of Kenyan, outside of Pat?
I think that first off, the first thing you want to talk about was the work of the offensive line in this game. I think you and I both agree this was probably the best effort we've seen from this team. They are a group that has played well at different times, and I know the Browns are devastated with injuries, but you know, when you have that ability to impose your will on another team, man, does it make you feel good as a fan, and players love that. I mean, players love the ability to just go out there and just kind of run the ball down their throat, and that's what they did.
For me, obviously the offensive line did well. I was most one of the things I wanted to see is, with Terrell Suggs gone, I wanted to, and then we're going to talk about that, I wanted to see how that position would do between Cassius Marsh and Hassan Reddick. This is not a good thing. They gave him nothing. Out of what it came out to 60-ish snaps between the two players, they combined for 4 tackles. There wasn't much pressure on the quarterback, and that was across the board. Not a lot of production. Hassan Reddick got hurt. Cassius Marsh really has sort of just been on the field most of this season. He has a few tackles. I will say that he's got a few tackles, but it's felt like he's mostly just been on the field. And then the couple of times that he's done his, roundhouse kick, one, he got credit for a sack, but he also, horse called a guy, so we got a penalty. And then the other one, he didn't even get credit for it because half the sack went to Chandler, half it went to Jonathan Bullard, even though he was in on the play. So I was a little disappointed. That was one of the things I looked at, as well as, well, heck, this kid, Dan Arnold, that they just claimed off waivers, and makes this incredible catch at the back of the end zone. Did the Cardinals just find their tight end weapon?
That's the thing, is like we talked about, biggest needs for this team is a true one-on-one guy that can win, and they lack that right now. And so I think that when you see a guy that can get into the end zone and win jump balls, that's a weapon that they have lacked at this point, or up until this point. And so I think you just have to be excited to see the way that they used Arnold. It was only on one play. I understand that, but it was the one play that we haven't seen from this team and that we haven't been able to find. So I think from that perspective, you're just excited about that.
Well, and it wasn't his first read, and he finally gets something. It's something you mentioned to me, I think, during the game, is when you have that sort of option in the end zone, it's perfect. It's the perfect no-risk throw for a quarterback like Kyler, who likes to take care of the ball, because you've got a guy who's 6'6", who can jump. You just put the ball up in the air, and he can get it. And if he gets it, it's a touchdown. If not, it's just an incomplete pass. You're not going to find many defensive backs who can defend a 6'6" guy going up high, and they won't get the ball out of the way. So that's something that was impressive from my perspective. Defensively, they didn't play well, but they played well enough, which they still got, Nick Chubb. They had a good game plan against the run. Nick Chubb just ran over a few guys, which he's done all season. So it looked like, he put up 117 yards on the ground. He had a couple of really big gains, which kind of troubled the Cardinals throughout. But overall, they had a pretty good game plan. And they still gave up 24 points. But if you're talking about a defense, isn't the way that they played on Sunday kind of what we just need the defense to be?
Yeah, and you just need to get enough stops to give your offense a chance to kind of build a lead, and that's what we've found. And I was texting you during the game, like, when they came out – well, first I texted you during the game about how they played the end of the half perfectly, because it was like, even if you don't get that touchdown, at least you're not giving the Browns enough time to go down and score, because we know that's been a bugaboo all season. And so the Browns came out and scored, and that sucked. But it wasn't a quick score. It was a methodical – it took a while. And all of that really kind of played into the Cardinals' hands of – that's where they've really struggled, is they give up a big touchdown or even a field goal before the half. And then you come back and you get somebody, come down and score. That would have been, 10 points or, God forbid, 14. That's a huge difference in the game. And so when it's just 7 and you have a chance to go answer, that makes a huge difference. And so I just think that the defense doing enough to stop at times was kind of the key to the success, because it's what we talked about. Like, if that defense shows up, if that defense that wasn't even that good shows up in either a San Francisco game or the Bucs game, this team is at 6 wins right now. But they haven't, and so ifs and buts are great, but it's not reality.
No. Coming next on the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. We'll talk about that release of Terrell Suggs. How did it go down? Was it weird? How do we feel about it? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea-Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web, and kind of a surprise move on Friday afternoon to get the press release that Terrell Suggs has been released. At first, it seemed more shocking because we've seen several veterans released, and it was for poor performance or poor fit. And Suggs hadn't really done a lick for about a month and a half. However, as Cliff Kingsbury, they made it very clear it was a mutual decision, that it's something they talked about, that they were super impressed with Suggs and they just have so much respect for him. What did you, what was your initial, because I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? oh, this is going to be ugly. He's, and it turned out that it was mutual. He wanted to go. He was going to get his role reduced. Team's losing. What was your initial reaction?
Good. I mean, like, that's my thing is there's a lot, like, and I don't know Terrell Suggs at all, so, like, I don't or I don't know anybody that knows him, and I haven't talked to anybody about this, but, like, when there is an issue with effort, and that's what I took from his play this season, especially after the first, like, 3 weeks. When there's an issue with effort, I don't think that is something that you can tangibly fix. It's a mentality, and you have to have the mentality to fix it. And Terrell has never played on bad football teams. That's just the thing, like, outside of Arizona State. Like, he hasn't played on bad football teams since he came in the league. So it's hard for him to understand that he is in a different role than what he normally is, where he's competing in October, November, and December. And so when you're playing for the future, when you're playing to learn and to grow and to do these different things, it just becomes this issue that a guy like Suggs has never had to deal with before. And so I think all of that boils down to this reality that he wasn't a fit for what they're trying to do. And so now you just kind of get out of whatever the issue was, and you move on to kind of the next flow. And the unfortunate thing was that the unfortunate thing was just that it came when it came, and it sucks that that's how the era of Terrell Suggs went in Arizona. But the reality is, I mean, this was year what, 17? Like, yeah. Dude's got nothing left in the tank to play for a team that's not in it. And that's just the reality of it. Like, it sucks, but that's how it works.
And now it was kind of interesting because it felt like he was angling to get back to Baltimore, but Baltimore didn't claim him. There were 4 teams who claimed him. He ends up going to the Kansas City Chiefs, and he is going to report. So he does get to play a complimentary role. He's going to be on a really good football team, and he still might get that Baltimore reunion. It just might be like in an AFC Championship game, which will be fun. So in the end, it's good for him. I think it'll be a good fit for him. I think he's used to the winning, and at least if he's going to have a lesser role, it will be on a successful team. I think it was going to be hard for him to accept, because since it was a dialogue that went both ways. As the Cardinals were moving towards using more Hassan Reddick, it had to feel weird for Suggs, who probably feels like he's a better player than Hassan Reddick, to get pushed into a lesser role and to be on a bad team. It is easier to accept a different role when you're winning football games. And if you're not doing that, not to say that he was a malcontent, because he wasn't. Cliff raved about the juice that he brought to work every day in terms of energy and approach to practice and leadership and everything like that. So in terms of in the building, he was a great addition to the team. On-field production, it looked good, but then tailed off quickly, and they can't afford defensively to not get pressure, and so they really needed someone else to pan out, or to not let Marcus Golden go, or have a guy like Nick Bosa or someone like that, or Josh Allen, like he's with the Jaguars, to sort of set things forward. So after finding out the reason, was okay, that makes sense. It's a respectful thing to do for a veteran player that's highly respected in the league. He wanted to come home and kind of finish his career, but things didn't go well. So now he gets to finish his career likely on a winning team. So good for him.
Yeah, and that's what he wants, and that's the unfortunate reality. I think the bad taste is always going to be the Bart Scott interview, and feeling like that's a true story just based on what you saw on the field.
Coming next on the Rise Up Seaward podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll wrap up the show talking about the Seattle Seahawks as they face them this weekend on the road over Christmas weekend. That's coming next on Rise Up Seaward. We're back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, best hour Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals' home schedule is done, so they will wrap up the season with 2 road games in the division in Seattle this weekend and then in Los Angeles in Week 17. Seattle's now the number is has in the lead in the NFC West, but they seem to keep doing it. What they've got. 8 or 10, like almost all of their wins have been by 1 score. Can they really keep up this whole thing of winning by 1 score every game? And if that's the case, can the Cardinals be in striking distance in Seattle in a hostile environment that some of these young guys have never been in?
That's going to be kind of where we're at and what the growth is of this season and kind of how far they've come. I think that if they are able to be within a score late, that would be the big thing for them heading into this offseason, is that they're ready to kind of continue to grow and play in tough environments. We've seen them do it once already against the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, if we get a performance like we saw in San Francisco or in even in Baltimore, I think you're okay with that. If you see a performance like we saw in New Orleans, or God forbid the one at home against the Rams, that's where the issue is going to become.
Now Seattle's got some injuries recently. Rashad Penny, he's out. Quandre Diggs is expected to miss this weekend, which is big because he was a force for them defensively. Bobby Wagner got a little banged up. He probably won't miss the game. Jadeveon Clowney is finally better from his illness. They don't know how he's going to look this week. Luke Wilson should be coming back. And, yeah, so Russell Wilson has turned the ball over a little more recently. But this is still a team that's going to be tough to match up with because everything that they do offensively starts with the run, and the Cardinals, while they defend that better, that's the type of offense that does give them trouble because then it forces play action.
Yeah, and if they're able to run the football a little more, you're going to be able to see more of Kyler, and it's going to take some pressure off of Kyler. If they are in a position where they're going to have to throw the ball a ton, I think you're going to see continued issues that you saw against Pittsburgh and even LA, where there's going to be some potential turnovers from Kyler and the offense. So that'll be the biggest thing moving forward.
I like Seattle's defense, as talented as it is. We've seen some really high-end games. There's still, you can move the ball on them, and if that's the case, if the Cardinals have really struggled against very strong fronts. Pittsburgh and LA really gave them fits. But they were able to move the ball against San Francisco. They were able to move the ball against Baltimore. If they can move the ball, if they don't become one-dimensional too early, as long as they can run the ball, then they can hang with them. Then it'll just be a matter of which defense can keep the other offense out of the end zone, because Seattle's going to move the ball, but at the same time, this is a game that has a high blowout index for me, because in Seattle, if things don't go well early, we've seen the Cardinals sort of crumble. This would be one of those games that they would crumble, and it would be, I don't know if it'd be quite the same as LA, but it could be close.
Yeah, and that's just kind of what you hope that they prevent here, is that they're able to keep the game close, that they're able to find a way to be in it towards the end, and then kind of let the chips fall where they may.
Key matchups for you. Where do you see the big matchups happening? I think obviously we always look at Chandler Jones. I think we have to look at, after Patrick Peterson's performance against Odell Beckham, it's time to put him to the test against Tyler Lockett, who, now they've got a whole bunch of receivers, so they don't key on particularly one. But that said, Tyler Lockett is their volume receiver if they have one on that team. Any other matchups that you like?
I would say, I would think you want Pat on Metcalf to make sure that you take away the deep game and the big plays, and you kind of force them to Lockett underneath, because we've seen historically, even when he's in his best seasons, Lockett is the type of player that's given him problems throughout his career. Doug Baldwin is another one that's always had, success. Golden Tate, these maybe not as fast, but these guys that are shifty and that work from the slot or various different positioning, they're the ones that typically find success against Patrick. So to me, that's one thing. The other thing is, how are they going to stop Jadeveon Clowney? He's a nightmare for anybody. So what happened to Bobby Wagner? I missed. Is he going to be able to play this week?
I sounds like he's gonna, but he was banged up for a little bit against the Panthers. Let me pull up what we have about Bobby.
It says he's going to ignore his injury and try to play.
Yeah, and he's the type of player that doesn't really matter. The Diggs being out is going to be huge, because he is that big hitter, the guy that's the playmaker back there. And so now you're going to get Bradley McDougald, who's pretty good in his own sense, and Lano Hill. He's not Quandre Diggs, but Diggs has really, really added something to that Seattle defense.
Yeah, and so they need to come out and they need to find a way to neutralize or kind of make the Seattle defense play multiples, and if they're able to do that, then they'll be okay. The problem is going to be what we saw last time. Anytime a team pins their ears back against the Cardinals, it's usually a long day for the Cardinals.
Correct. Do you see them being successful against Chris Carson defending the run?
No. They weren't against a better running back in Nick Chubb, but I think they're going to have success. I think you're going to see Carson go for over 100 yards, and that's really where the kind of matchup is going to turn in the favor of the Seahawks, is that they're going to be able to control the clock in the game, limit the touches of the Arizona offense, and I think that's going to be ending up how they win this game.
Interesting. Well, one minor complaint that I have about this year is the fact that Mike Iupati has managed to stay relatively healthy all season. He's played in all 14 games this year.
It's the nano bubbles.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And he's been pretty all right. And, he's a really good run blocker. And that's really kind of how they get things going there. So he's enjoying himself out there. It does make me sad, though, that, come on.
I do think it's ironic that both have played better, Sweezy and
That's
Iupati.
True. We basically swapped guards, and J.R. Sweezy and Mike Iupati, and both of those guys are playing better this year than they did last year. So, it works out then. It works out. That said, let's make your call. What do you predict this game will be?
I think this will be like a 23-17 Seahawks win. I think the Cardinals will be able to keep it close and then end up, not being able to do enough offensively to win this game. Playing out similar to like the Steelers game did.
27-23. I don't think their defense is going to hold the Cardinals as low as Pittsburgh did. I think that they are more vulnerable defensively. We've seen teams score points on them. 27-23, Seattle wins, but at least the momentum of competitive games continues. And honestly, if Russell Wilson's within a score or within a possession in the fourth quarter, it's going to end poorly for your team, and that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, and did you see that like crazy stat that I don't know if it's all of Pete Carroll or if it's just Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, but they have held a lead in 134 of 139 games that they've been in together. So yeah, like they're incredibly good together. They're a what I think everybody hopes the Arizona Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray can get to eventually.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast. This will likely be we won't have a show together next week. I'll be out of town with family. We normally would be recording on Tuesday night, Christmas Eve. That's probably not when we should be recording the show. If I do a show, it'll be solo, but we're looking at our next show being after the season's conclusion. So until then, sit tight. We will be back. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening, and go Cardinals. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.